Rancora had made the long and perilous journey to the Isle of Misera many times, but the boat ride seemed swift and almost effortless now that she knew it was only a short time before she began to destroy Starland. Under the dark shroud of night, she felt a chilling satisfaction as she approached the shore, where black water lapped at the glowing gray sand. Clutching her precious box with the large crystal teardrop inside, along with the negatite rock that had come from Mallory's bad wish orb, she trained her fiery eyes at the prow of the boat to slowly guide it onto the rocky beach. Then she made her way toward the familiar path that cut through a forest of thorny, knotted trees. When she reached the end of the path, Rancora headed straight for the negatite garden, an enormous glasshouse where she had been cultivating the plants that would be crucial in her plan to infiltrate Starling Academy. Her old friend Stella had been headmistress of their alma mater for far too long, and it had taken almost as many decades of bad wish missions for Rancora to gather enough negative energy to take over Starland. It was now time to perform her most challenging transformation spell yet. As she slid open the transparent door to the garden, the entire house began to hiss and gasp, and Rancora could hear the gnarled shrubs and tattered blossoms crying out, each one begging for her to tend to it first. "Don't worry, my darlings," she cooed after quickly grinding Mallory's negatite rock into powder and placing it in a long glass test tube. Then, making her way along the rows, she sprinkled the dark dust into the soil below. "There's more than enough for everyone." The plants heaved inside, twisting and bending toward Rancora as she continued to feed them the sinister sustenance they craved. "I know, my darlings, I know," she told them as she made her way to the back corner in search of one plant in particular. "You're ready to go on a mission of your own, and I'm ready, too." Rancora walked over to the very first twinklefoil shrub she had ever planted, and bent down to check the negatite level in the pot. Her purple eyes glowed with delight on discovering how far it had come. As she plucked one of its enormous gray blossoms, it let out a twisted scream and instantly sprouted long, sharp thorns from its thick wood-like stem. "Silence!" Rancora snapped at the plant, and the thorns immediately retracted. "This is why I've been feeding you so well, and at last you've delivered." As the plant curled and wheezed apologetically, Rancora gave it a gentle pat and stormed back through the garden and out the glass door. Certain that she now had everything she needed, she raced across the dusty landscape toward the cottage where she had stored the rest of the ingredients. On arriving at the sagging wooden structure, Rancora flung open the door and ignited several candles with a silent, negative energy-fueled command. She marched across the cold black floor to a jagged tree stump that functioned as a table, and set down the gray flower next to a hollow book entitled Negatite Magic. Next she lifted the lid off a large container and began to examine each of the ingredients gathered over the course of her many bad wish missions. But it wasn't until she came to a pair of old but still sparkling friendship charms, hers in pale blue and Stella's in golden pink, that a solitary, shimmering tear began to make its way down Rancora's sunken gray cheek. She scowled as she wondered if Stella had even noticed she'd taken both halves of the charm they shared on the day she was expelled from Starling Academy. "Enough!" Rancora roared at herself, brushing away the lone tear and dropping the charms back into the container. She quickly grabbed the Negatite Magic hollow book and scrolled through until she found the recipe she had been studying for several long decades. It was finally time to get to work, and she didn't want to waste another moment. So she gathered up the container full of ingredients and the flower she had just plucked from the negatite garden and carefully followed the recipe, step by step, muttering the directions to herself as she did so. 1. In a simmering pot of Misera's black waters, place the hairs of at least 10 distressed wishling daughters. 2. Crumble in petals from one twinkle foil that's dried up after growing in negatite soil. 3. Melt down 2 charms that still sparkle and glow for a friendship whose light went out long, long ago. 4. As all the ingredients bubble and shimmer, turn down the heat and continue to simmer. 5. When the liquid transforms to a bright purple hue, simply drink it down and become a new you. It took the better part of the night, but at last the cooking and conjuring were complete. Carefully, Rancora transferred the formula to a large silver mug and gazed down at the surface as it continued to shimmer and swirl. Would it really work? There was only one way to find out, so after taking a deep breath, she brought the mug to her lips and gulped it down. Almost instantly, Rancora's entire body grew rigid and began to convulse. With arms splayed out, she dropped the mug and it clanged and clattered on the dusty ground as a thick purple cloud began swirling around her. Breathing in the enchanted fog, she felt as if she was shrinking and expanding all at once until, finally, the lavender mist dissipated and a sense of calm washed over her. Slowly, Rancora brought her hands to her face and discovered that her sunken cheeks had become full and plump. She continued to trace the contours up to her hair, which was now tied back into a perfectly round bun and fastened with a big soft bow. Meanwhile, her tattered gray gown had been replaced with a shiny purple blouse and skirt, and she wore a pair of sparkling purple stockings and sandals fastened with glowing silver buckles. Of course, she had gone through thousands of transformations during her journeys to Wishworld, but this was different. This was the result of everything she'd been working toward. She walked to a dusty old mirror and studied her reflection. It was both repulsive and marvelous, the purple hair, eyes, and lips and the short, rotund physique that had entirely obliterated her long, lean frame. Rancora cringed at the way she sparkled as brightly as she had when she was a young starling. As painful as it was to look at herself, it was also precisely what she needed to see to get into character completely. So once she'd absorbed every last detail, she clasped her hands together and took a little bow toward the mirror. Then, finally, she introduced herself as meekly as possible to an imaginary Lady Stella. I am Lady CCC Cordial, she stammered. I understand you are in NNN need of a NNN new director of ADMMM missions. Yes. She was almost too good. Rancora widened her eyes and beamed at her reflection, and once she began smiling, it was impossible to stop. This was bound to be the performance of her lifetime, and she couldn't hide the delight she took in knowing that the day had finally arrived. At long last, she was going to be able to put the plans she'd been making for so long into action,